The wagon wheels groaned against the frozen ruts of the road, each jolt sending a sharp pain through Annalise Durham's spine. She pulled the threadbare blanket tighter around her daughter's shoulders, watching as little Liza's breath formed small clouds in the bitter December air. 7 years. 7 years since she'd last seen the weathered buildings of Dustwater, and now she was returning with nothing more than a canvas bag of worn clothes, this heavy woolen blanket, and a grief that sat in her chest like a stone.
"Mama, when will we be there?"
Liza's voice was small, muffled by the blanket. "Soon, sweet girl, very soon." The driver, an old man with hands like leather, glanced back at them. "Dustwater ain't changed much, ma'am. Still the same dusty hole it always was. 'Cept now it's a frozen one." Annalise nodded, but didn't reply. She remembered Dustwater well enough. Remembered being the blacksmith's daughter who stood too tall, spoke too plainly, and couldn't seem to master the art of keeping her opinions behind her teeth like proper ladies should. At 21, she'd married Thomas Hartley and left for Missouri, thinking distance would soften the edges of who she was. It hadn't. Thomas had spent 7 years trying to mold her into something quieter, something smaller, until the fever took him 3 weeks ago. The wagon crested the hill, and there it was. Dustwater spread out below them like a collection of wooden blocks dropped by a careless child. The church steeple still leaned slightly to the east. Barnett's general store still needed a new coat of paint, and her father's old smithy sat dark and cold at the edge of town, its chimney no longer breathing smoke into the sky.
"That where we're going?"
"Mama," Liza pointed at the smithy. "No, love, that belonged to your grandfather. He's been gone 2 winters now." She'd received the letter in Missouri, but Thomas wouldn't let her return for the funeral, said it wasn't proper for a woman to travel alone, and he couldn't leave his business. She'd stood at the kitchen window that day, kneading bread until her knuckles bled, imagining her father's calloused hands going still forever. The wagon rolled down Main Street, and Annalise kept her eyes forward. She could feel the stares from behind curtained windows. Mrs. Hutchins at the millinery, no doubt already spreading word that the Durham girl was back. And wasn't it shameful how she'd left before her husband was even cold in the ground? Let them talk. She'd buried Thomas properly, said the words over his grave, and waited the respectable 3 days before selling what little they had for coach fare home. Whoa there. The driver pulled up outside Morrison's boarding house, a narrow building squeezed between the barber shop and the land office. The paint was peeling, but smoke rose invitingly from the chimney. Annalise climbed down first, her legs stiff from the cold, then lifted Liza to the ground. The little girl's cheeks were red as apples, her father's dark eyes bright with curiosity as she took in this new place that was somehow also old, according to her mother's stories. The boarding house door opened before they could knock. Martha Morrison stood there, rounder than Annalise remembered, her graying hair pinned severely back, but her face soft with something that might have been sympathy. "Annalise Durham, heard you might be coming back."
"It's Hartley now, or was."
Annalise straightened her shoulders.
"I need a room, Mrs. Morrison, just until I can find work and something more permanent."
Martha's eyes dropped to Liza, and her expression gentled.
"Come in out of the cold, both of you. We'll sort out the particulars over something hot."
The boarding house smelled of wood smoke and boiled cabbage, with an undertone of lye soap that brought back memories of helping her mother with washing days. Martha led them to the kitchen, where a pot simmered on the massive iron stove.
"Sit, sit. You look dead on your feet."
Annalise sank onto the bench. Liza pressed close to her side. The warmth was almost painful after the hours in the wagon, her fingers tingling as feeling returned.
"Coffee's hot. Got some milk for the little one?"
Martha bustled about, not meeting Annalise's eyes.
"I was sorry to hear about your husband."
"Thank you." The words came out flat. What else was there to say that Thomas had been cold even in life? That his death had felt less like losing a spouse and more like being released from a contract neither of them had wanted to honor? Martha set down 2 cups and a plate of cornbread. How old is she? 6 last August. Pretty thing, got her father's coloring. Annalise's hand tightened on her cup. Yes, Liza had Thomas's dark hair and eyes, but thankfully none of his rigid nature. The child was all curiosity and stubborn will, traits that Thomas had tried to discourage with sharp words and long silences. I can pay, Annalise said. I've got a little money, and I'm looking for work. I can cook, clean, mend. I'm not afraid of hard labor. Martha studied her over the rim of her cup. You planning on staying in Dustwater? I don't know. Maybe. It depends on what I can find. Well, Martha stood, wiping her hands on her apron. It so happens I might know of something. There's a man out at Windy Ridge Ranch, Jack Leland, his housekeeper up and married last month. Moved to California. He's been making do, but with winter setting in hard, he needs someone to cook and keep house. The pay's fair, and there's a room off the kitchen that'd suit you and the girl. Annalise set down her cup carefully. What kind of man is he? Martha's pause spoke volumes. He's particular. Keeps to himself mostly. Runs horses and grows beans. Been out there 8 years now. Maybe 9. Lost his wife early on. Fever took her the first winter. He doesn't talk much. Doesn't visit town except for supplies. But he's honest. Pays on time. And never heard of him raising a hand to anyone didn't deserve it. And he'd take on a woman with a child. Can't say for certain, but he's practical above all else. If you can cook and keep house, he won't much care about the rest. Martha glanced at Liza, who was carefully breaking her cornbread into tiny pieces. Though I'd suggest you meet him first. He's got a way of looking at people that makes them want to confess every sin they ever thought of committing. Despite herself, Annalise almost smiled. When could I meet him? Tomorrow, if you like. He comes to town Saturdays for supplies. I'll send word you're interested. That night, Annalise lay in the narrow boarding house bed with Liza curled against her side. The child slept deeply, exhausted from the journey. But Annalise stared at the water stains on the ceiling and wondered what she was doing. She'd fled one cold house only to return to a town that had never wanted her. And now she was considering working for a man who, by Martha's careful description, sounded like he'd make Thomas look warm by comparison. But what choice did she have? The money from selling Thomas's tools and furniture would last a month. Maybe 2 if she was careful. She needed work, needed a place for Liza that was more than a boarding house room. And if this Jack Leland was as antisocial as Martha suggested, perhaps he wouldn't care that she was the too tall, too plain Durham girl who'd never learned to hold her tongue. The wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the walls, mice scratched out their own existence. Liza murmured in her sleep, and Annalise pulled her closer. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever this Jack Leland turned out to be, she'd survived 7 years with Thomas Hartley. She could survive anything. Morning came gray and bitter, frost thick on the windows. Annalise dressed carefully in her least mended dress, braided her wheat-colored hair severely back, and tried not to think about how her hands shook as she buttoned Liza into her warmest dress. Are we staying here, Mama? Liza asked, watching Annalise's preparations with those 2 knowing eyes. Maybe not here exactly. We might go live on a ranch. Would you like that? With horses. Liza's face lit up. Real horses. Real horses. Annalise smoothed down a stubborn curl. But we have to meet the man who owns the ranch first, so you must be very good and very quiet. Can you do that? The child nodded solemnly, and Annalise's heart twisted. 6 years old and already learning that survival sometimes meant becoming smaller, quieter, less, just as her mother had tried to teach her, though the lessons had never quite taken. They descended to find Martha already busy in the kitchen. He's here, she said without preamble. In the parlor, figured it'd be more private than the mercantile. Annalise's stomach clenched. Thank you. Want me to mind the girl? No. Annalise took Liza's hand. We come as we are. Martha nodded approvingly.
Good. No sense pretending otherwise.
The parlor was a small room dominated by horsehair furniture and antimacassars yellowed with age. The man standing by the window seemed to fill it completely, though he wasn't particularly large. He was simply present in a way that made the room rearrange itself around him. Jack Leland turned as they entered, and Annalise understood what Martha had meant about confessing sins. His eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and unforgiving. His face had been carved by wind and sun into something that might have been handsome before the hardness set in. He wore simple work clothes, clean but mended, and his hands, she noticed hands, always had since growing up watching her father work, were scarred from labor. Mrs. Hartley. His voice was low, rough as gravel. Martha says you're looking for work.
I am.
She kept her chin up, met those cold eyes directly.
I can cook, clean, mend. I'm not afraid of hard work.
His gaze dropped to Liza, who pressed closer to Annalise's skirts.
The girl yours?
She is.
How old?
6. He was quiet for a long moment, studying them both with an expression that gave away nothing. Finally, he said, the job's cooking 3 meals a day, keeping the house, maybe some mending. Washing's done by the Carlson girl from town, comes twice a week. Room off the kitchen's small but sound. Stove keeps it warm. Pays $20 a month plus board.
$20.
It was fair, more than fair. And my daughter. Long as she doesn't get underfoot, doesn't matter to me. He paused. Can you start Monday?
Yes.
Good. He moved toward the door, then stopped.
I should tell you, I don't talk much. Don't like questions. You do your work, I'll do mine, and we'll get along fine.
He was gone before Annalise could respond, leaving only the scent of leather and winter air. She stood there, Liza's hand warm in hers, and wondered if she just traded one silent house for another.
Well,
Martha appeared in the doorway.
What do you think?
Annalise looked down at Liza, at her bright, curious eyes.
I think we'll manage.
And if her voice shook slightly, if her hands trembled as she lifted Liza into her arms, Martha was kind enough not to notice. Outside, the wind howled down from the mountains, bringing with it the promise of snow and long, dark months ahead. But for now, they had a place to go, work to be done, and that was enough. It had to be. Monday morning arrived with a fresh dusting of snow and a sky the color of old pewter. Annalise stood at the boarding house window, her single carpetbag packed, watching as a wagon pulled up outside. The driver wasn't Jack Leland, but a young man with copper hair and an easy smile. Mrs. Hartley, I'm Sam Carlson. Mr. Leland sent me to fetch you and the little miss. Sam loaded their meager belongings while keeping up a steady stream of chatter about the weather. The roads. His sister Emma, who did the washing at Windy Ridge. Annalise was grateful for his warmth after Jack Leland's Arctic demeanor, though she noticed how Sam's words seemed to dry up the closer they got to the ranch. Windy Ridge sat in a valley between 2 low hills, sheltered from the worst of the mountain winds, but exposed enough to earn its name. The main house was built of solid timber, 2 stories with a wide porch across the front. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys. To the left stood a large barn and several outbuildings. To the right, a fenced pasture where horses moved like shadows through the morning mist. Kitchens through the back, Sam said, helping them down. Mr. Leland said to tell you he'll be in the barn till supper. The kitchen door opened into warmth and the lingering smell of coffee. The room was large and functional. A massive iron cook stove dominated one wall. Shelves lined another, and a sturdy wooden table occupied the center. Everything was clean but austere, without a single unnecessary object to soften the edges. Our room's through here. Annalise pushed open a door beside the stove to reveal a small space with 2 narrow beds, a washstand, and hooks for clothes. One window looked out toward the barn. It was cramped but warm, and after some of the places they'd lived with Thomas, it felt almost luxurious.
Look, Mama, we can see the horses.
Liza pressed her nose to the window glass. Annalise unpacked quickly, hanging their few dresses on the hooks, placing Liza's rag doll on the smaller bed. In the kitchen, she took inventory. The pantry was well stocked with flour, beans, salt pork, preserved goods. A root cellar door in the corner promised potatoes and winter vegetables. She could work with this. By noon, she had bread rising, beans soaking for tomorrow, and a simple stew simmering on the stove. Liza sat at the table with a piece of paper Sam had left, carefully drawing shapes that might have been horses or might have been clouds. The back door opened without warning. Jack Leland filled the doorframe, bringing cold air and the scent of hay. His pale eyes took in the scene, the steam rising from the stove, Liza's bent head, Annalise with her sleeves rolled up and flour on her apron. Dinner's at noon, supper at 6. He said, I take coffee at 5 in the morning, breakfast at 6:30. Yes, Mr. Leland. He started to turn away, then paused.
The girl, she knows to stay clear of the barn.
She does. A brief nod, and he was gone. Liza looked up at her mother with wide eyes. Is he angry? No, sweet girl, he's just quiet. But as the days passed, Annalise began to understand that Jack Leland was more than just quiet. He was a man who'd built walls so high and thick that nothing seemed to penetrate. He appeared for meals exactly on time, ate efficiently, and left with only a nod of acknowledgement. He never complained about the food, never complimented it either. Just ate what was put before him and returned to his work. The first week was the hardest. Annalise had grown used to Thomas's criticism, his constant corrections. This silence was different, not hostile, just empty. She found herself talking to Liza more than necessary, filling the space with words about anything and nothing. Mr. Horseman doesn't talk much, does he? Liza observed on their 4th day, watching Jack's retreating back after breakfast. Mr. Leland, Annalise corrected automatically. And no, he doesn't. Maybe he's sad, like you were after Papa went to heaven. Annalise's hand stilled on the dish she was washing. Maybe he is. She'd learned from Sam, who came twice a week with his sister Emma, that Jack's wife had died 8 years ago. Sarah, her name had been, took fever their first winter at Windy Ridge and was gone in 3 days. Sam had been just a boy then, but he remembered the funeral. Remembered how Jack had stood at the graveside like a man carved from stone. Hasn't been the same since, Emma confided while helping with the washing. She was a cheerful girl of 17 with Sam's red hair and frank manner. Used to smile, they say, even laughed sometimes. Now, she shrugged. Well, you see how he is. Annalise did see. She saw it in the way he never entered the main house except for meals, sleeping instead in a room off the barn. Saw it in the careful distance he maintained, never coming close enough that she could feel his presence as anything more than a chill. Saw it in the way his eyes never quite met hers, always focused on something just past her shoulder. The second week brought the first real snowstorm. Annalise woke to wind howling around the corners of the house and snow piling against the windows. She dressed quickly, checked on Liza still sleeping warm in her bed, and made her way to the kitchen to start the coffee. Jack was already there, snow in his hair, feeding wood into the stove. Storm's bad, he said without turning. Might last a couple days. I've brought extra wood to the porch. Thank you. She reached for the coffee pot, careful not to brush too close. Will the horses be all right? He glanced at her then, surprise flickering across his features. They're in the barn. They'll keep. It was the longest conversation they'd had. Annalise treasured it through the long day as the storm raged, keeping Liza entertained with stories and small tasks while snow piled to the windows. Jack appeared for meals like a ghost materializing from the white, ate silently, and vanished again. That night, with the wind screaming and the house groaning under the weight of snow, Annalise lay awake, listening. Through the thin walls, she could hear movement from the main house. Footsteps pacing, the creak of floorboards. So he did enter the house sometimes, when he thought no one would notice. A soft knock at her door made her heart jump. She opened it to find Jack standing there with a heavy quilt in his arms. "Thought you might need this. Gets cold when the wind's like this." She took the quilt, noting how careful he was not to let their hands touch. "Thank you, Mr. Leland." He nodded, already turning away, then stopped. "The girl, is she warm enough?" "Yes, she's fine." "Good." He disappeared into the darkness of the kitchen, and soon she heard the outside door close. Annalise spread the extra quilt over Liza, tucking it carefully around the small form. It smelled of cedar and something else, something she couldn't quite name. When she climbed back into her own bed, she thought she slept better for knowing he'd thought of them, even in his distant way. The storm passed, leaving behind a world transformed into pristine white. Liza begged to go outside, and Annalise bundled her up, watching from the kitchen window as the child explored the wonderland of snow. She was building what might charitably be called a snowman when Jack emerged from the barn. Annalise tensed, ready to call Liza inside, but Jack simply stood watching the child work. After a moment, he walked over and, without a word, began helping pack the snow more firmly. Liza chattered at him about her creation, and while Jack didn't respond, he didn't walk away either. When they came in for dinner, Liza's cheeks were bright with cold and excitement. "Mr. Leland showed me how to make the snow stick better," she announced. "He says if you pack it just right, it stays." Jack focused intently on his soup, but Annalise thought she saw something soften around his eyes. As November wore into December, small things began to change. Jack still maintained his distance, still spoke only when necessary, but his presence felt less like a wall and more like a fence. Still there, but with gaps you could see through. He left things without comment or explanation. A bag of peppermint sticks on the kitchen table, which Liza discovered with delight. New hooks by the door, positioned at the right height for a small girl's coat. A sled appeared on the porch one morning, just the right size for a 6-year-old. "Did Mr. Leland make this for me?" Liza asked, running her hands over the smooth runners. "I don't know," Annalise said honestly. "Maybe you should thank him at dinner." But when Liza piped up with her thanks, Jack merely nodded and said, "Saw it in the barn. No use it going to waste." Annalise hid her smile. The sled was clearly new, the wood fresh cut and carefully sanded. But if he needed the fiction, she wouldn't challenge it. One evening, as she was putting dinner on the table, Jack spoke unexpectedly. "You're not from around here originally?" It wasn't a question, but Annalise answered anyway. "No, my father he came here from Ohio. Set up the smithy. Durham, I remember him. Good man, honest work." "Yes. You have his height?" She stiffened, waiting for the rest, the judgment, the criticism. Thomas had hated that she could look him in the eye, had made her slouch in company. "Useful," Jack continued, reaching for the salt. "Can reach the high shelves without a ladder." It was so unexpected, so utterly practical, that Annalise nearly laughed. "Yes, it is useful." After that, their silences felt different. Not companionable exactly, but less strained. Jack still kept his distance, still slept in the barn, still appeared and disappeared like smoke. But sometimes, she caught him almost smiling at something Liza said. Sometimes, he lingered an extra moment after meals. And once, just once, when she was struggling to move a heavy pot of water from the stove, he was suddenly there, lifting it easily, setting it where she needed without a word. Their hands brushed in the transfer, just for an instant, and she felt the calluses on his palm, the warmth beneath the roughness. "Thank you," she managed. He was already moving away. "Careful, don't want you getting hurt. Be inconvenient." But she'd seen something in that moment when their hands touched. A flicker of something human behind those winter-pale eyes. Something that might have been loneliness, carefully guarded but not quite hidden enough. That night, as she lay listening to the wind and the distant sounds of horses in the barn, Annalise thought about walls, about the ones we build to keep pain out, and how sometimes they keep everything else out too. She thought about Jack Leland, alone out there with his horses and his silence, and wondered if he ever lay awake remembering what it felt like before the walls went up. In her sleep, Liza murmured something about horses and snow. Annalise pulled the cedar-scented quilt higher and closed her eyes. Tomorrow there would be bread to bake, meals to cook, a silent man to feed. But for now, in this small, warm room beside the kitchen, she and her daughter were safe. And that, she was learning, was no small thing. December arrived with teeth. The temperature plummeted until the water bucket by the door froze solid every night, and frost crept up the inside of windows like ghostly ferns. Annalise rose earlier each morning, feeding the stove until it roared, trying to push warmth into all the cold corners of the kitchen. The house itself seemed to contract in the cold, boards creaking and settling with sounds like gunshots in the night. She learned to recognize each noise, the pop of frozen wood, the whistle of wind through gaps in the walls, the scratch of ice forming on the roof. Jack appeared one morning with his collar turned up against the bitter air, ice crystals in his beard. "Need to seal those windows better," he said, setting a bucket of fresh milk on the table. "I'll get to it this afternoon." But by afternoon, the snow was falling so thick she couldn't see the barn. Jack didn't come in for dinner. Annalise kept the food warm, watching the window, until finally she bundled herself in her heaviest shawl and made her way to the barn. She found him in the hayloft, forking down feed for the horses. "Mister, Leland dinner's ready." He paused, not looking at her. "Not hungry. You and the girl go ahead." "The food will spoil." "Then save it for tomorrow." Something in his tone, flat, empty, made her climb the ladder despite her skirts. The loft was warmer than outside, but still cold enough to see her breath. Jack stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid. "Are you ill?" "No." "Then what?" She stopped. On a beam near his head hung a small carved frame with a photograph. A young woman with dark hair and a tentative smile. Sarah. "It's her birthday," Jack said quietly. "Would have been 31 today." Annalise stood silent, not knowing what to say. The snow hissed against the barn roof, and below them, horses shifted in their stalls. "She hated winter," he continued. "Came from Georgia. Never could get warm enough. I kept promising we'd build a bigger fireplace, get more windows for the sun. Never got the chance." "I'm sorry." He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were terrible in their emptiness. "Why, you didn't know her?" "No, but I know what it's like to lose things." They stood there in the cold loft. Two people who understood that grief was not something you got over, but something you learned to carry. Finally, Jack moved toward the ladder. "Food's getting cold," he said. That night, for the first time, he ate in complete silence. Even Liza seemed to sense the change, staying quiet throughout the meal. But as he stood to leave, Jack paused at Liza's chair. "You know your letters." Liza nodded eagerly. "Mama's been teaching me." "Good. Education's important." He glanced at Annalise. "There's books in the house. Parlor bookshelf, if you want them." Then he was gone, leaving Annalise to wonder at this small crack in his armor. The next morning, she ventured into the main house for the first time. The parlor was dusty but intact, furnished with pieces that spoke of comfort before tragedy. And the bookshelf, it was full of volumes that surprised her. Poetry, novels, books on agriculture and horse breeding, even some children's stories. She selected a book of fairy tales for Liza and, on impulse, a volume of Tennyson. That evening, after Liza was asleep, she sat by the kitchen stove reading by lamplight. The kitchen door opened, and Jack entered to bank the fires for the night. He stopped when he saw the book in her hands. That was hers. He said, Sarah's. She loved poetry. I can put it back. No. He moved to the stove, adjusting the damper. Books should be read. No point them sitting there collecting dust. He left without another word, but something had shifted. The next night, he lingered after banking the fires, watching as she read to Liza from the fairy tale book. The night after that, he actually sat at the table while she read, whittling a piece of wood into something that might become a toy horse. The cold deepened. Some mornings, the water in her wash basin was frozen solid. Annalise took to heating stones on the stove and wrapping them in cloth for their beds. She noticed Jack doing the same, carrying wrapped stones out to the barn. "Do you never sleep in the house?" she asked one particularly bitter night. The temperature had dropped so low that ice was forming on the inside walls. "No. You'll freeze out there. Been managing 8 winters. I'll manage this one." But the next morning, Sam Carlson arrived with news that made even Jack's stoicism waver. "Temperature's dropping worse tonight," Sam said, stamping snow off his boots. "Pa says it might hit 30 below. Lost 2 cows already at the Hendricks place. Froze standing up." Jack's jaw tightened. "The horses?" "Bring them into the main barn. All of them. Pack them tight. They'll keep each other warm." Sam glanced at Annalise. "You might want to move extra blankets into the kitchen. Ma'am, sleep by the stove tonight. These old houses, when it gets this cold." That evening, Jack worked late, moving horses, packing straw, preparing for the deadly cold. Annalise made a huge pot of stew, fresh bread, coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. When he finally came in, his face was raw with cold, his hands so stiff he could barely hold the cup. "The horses," she asked. "Settled. They'll make it." He paused, looking at the small door to her room. "Sam's right. You and the girl should sleep in the kitchen tonight. Drag the mattresses out. I'll help." They worked together in silence, creating a makeshift bedroom near the stove. Liza thought it was an adventure, bouncing on her mattress on the floor, but Annalise saw the worry in Jack's eyes as he tested the windows, added more wood to the fire. "You should sleep inside too," she said quietly. "The barn won't be safe." "I'll be with the horses. They need watching." "They need you alive. What good will you be to them frozen?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw surprise in his eyes. As if no one had expressed concern for his well-being in so long he'd forgotten what it sounded like. "I'll be fine," he said, but his voice was less certain. The cold came like a living thing, pressing against the windows, searching for ways in. Annalise kept the stove roaring, but still the edges of the room grew icy. She tucked Liza between 2 heated stones, piling quilts until only the child's nose was visible. Near midnight, the door burst open in a swirl of snow and bitter air. Jack stumbled in, shaking so hard he could barely stand. "Pipes in the barn are freezing," he managed through chattering teeth. "Need to thaw. Just for a bit." But Annalise could see he was in trouble. His face was white with cold, his hands curled into claws. She pulled a chair close to the stove, pushed him into it. "You're staying, no arguments." She made fresh coffee, wrapped a quilt around his shoulders, watched as slowly, painfully, the shaking subsided. His feet were the worst. She could see it in the way he tried not to move them. "Boots off," she ordered. "I'm fine." "Now." Perhaps it was her tone, or perhaps he was simply too cold to fight, but he complied. His socks were stiff with ice. His feet, when she finally saw them, were white and waxy. "Frostbite," she said. "Not too bad yet, but close." She fetched a basin of cool water, not warm. She'd learned that from her father. "This will hurt." It did. She saw it in the way his jaw locked, the way his hands gripped the chair arms. But he didn't make a sound as she carefully tended his feet, working feeling back into the frozen flesh. Where did you learn this? He asked when he could speak again.
My father saw plenty of frostbite at the smithy. Men who'd been caught out, travelers who'd misjudged the weather. She wrapped his feet in soft cloth.
You're lucky. Another hour and you'd have lost toes.
They sat there by the stove, the only warm spot in a frozen world. Liza slept on, unaware of the drama. The wind howled like something alive and angry, and ice cracked on the roof like rifle shots.
I should check the horses, Jack said eventually. In the morning, they're smarter than you. They'll huddle together and keep warm.
A ghost of a smile crossed his face.
Smarter than me. Probably right.
He dozed then, exhausted by cold and pain. Annalise kept vigil, feeding the stove, watching his face for signs of distress. In sleep, the harsh lines softened. She could see the younger man he'd been before the loss carved those grooves around his mouth and eyes.
Toward dawn, the wind finally began to die. The temperature rose enough that the walls stopped cracking. Jack stirred, wincing as he moved his feet.
Better? She asked. Yes, thanks to you.
He looked at her directly, and there was something new in his eyes. Not warmth exactly, but an acknowledgement.
You should have let me freeze. Would have made your life simpler.
Don't be stupid.
He blinked at her bluntness, then did something she'd never seen. He smiled, just a small quirk of his lips, but real. Yes, ma'am. When the sun finally rose on a world encased in ice, they were still there by the stove, Jack in his chair, Annalise on a stool nearby, and Liza beginning to stir under her mountain of quilts. The crisis had passed, but something fundamental had changed in that long, frozen night. That evening, Jack brought his bedroll to the parlor. Just until this cold snap breaks, he said, not meeting her eyes. Easier to keep the house warm with more people in it. Annalise nodded, hiding her relief.
Makes sense. They fell into a new pattern. Jack slept in the parlor, appeared for breakfast looking somewhat sheepish, as if expecting to be told to return to the barn. But Annalise said nothing, just served his coffee and went about her work. Liza was delighted to have Mr. Jack in the house, chattering at him about everything and nothing.
Do you think the snow angels are cold? She asked one morning. The ones we made yesterday.
Jack considered this seriously. Snow angels are made of snow. Can't get colder than they already are.
Oh.
Liza thought about this.
That's sad. They can never be warm.
Maybe that's why they're angels. Jack said, already in heaven where it's warm.
Liza beamed at him, and Annalise felt something twist in her chest. This man who'd built such walls, who'd held himself apart so carefully, was beginning to thaw like his frozen feet. And maybe, just maybe, she was thawing too. That night, she left a cup of hot milk outside the parlor door. No note, no explanation. In the morning, the cup was empty on the kitchen table, washed and dried. Neither of them said anything, but the silence was different now. Warmer, like the kitchen in the aftermath of that terrible cold, still winter outside, but with the promise that spring, however distant, would eventually come. The change in Liza was gradual but unmistakable. Where once she'd been quiet and watchful, too careful for a 6-year-old, now she bloomed like a flower finding unexpected sun. It started with small things humming while she drew her pictures, skipping instead of walking to the chicken coop, laughing at the rooster's proud strutting. Mr. Jack, look. She ran to him one morning as he returned from the barn, holding up a peculiar ice formation she'd found. It's like a glass butterfly. Jack stopped, studied the ice with the same serious attention he gave to examining horses' hooves. That's a fine one. See how the sun makes it shine different colors? Can I keep it? It'll melt. Oh. Her face fell slightly, then brightened. But I can remember it. That you can. He reached into his pocket, pulled out something small. Here, found this in the barn.
It was a blue glass button, chipped on one edge but still catching the light. Liza cradled it like treasure. "It's beautiful. Thank you, Mr. Jack." She skipped away to show her mother, leaving Jack standing in the yard with something almost soft around his eyes. Annalise watched from the window, her hands still in the bread dough, and felt that twist in her chest again. That evening, while Liza played with her button collection, the blue one had sparked a passion for finding more. Jack lingered at the dinner table. "She's different than she was," he observed. Annalise continued drying dishes, choosing her words carefully. "She is." "Happier." "Yes. Her father." He paused, and Annalise could feel him selecting his own words like stepping stones across dangerous water. "He wasn't kind to her." She set down the plate, gripped the edge of the sink. "He wasn't cruel, just cold. Expected her to be quiet, still, like a piece of furniture that could move itself when needed." "That's a kind of cruel." The understanding in his voice nearly undid her. She'd never spoken of it to anyone. The slow suffocation of living with Thomas, watching him try to squeeze the life out of their daughter the way he'd tried to squeeze it out of her. "Yes," she said quietly. "I suppose it was." They stood in silence, the kitchen warm around them. Liza's cheerful humming drifting from the parlor where she played. Finally. Jack pushed back from the table. "She can make all the noise she wants here," he said gruffly. "House was too quiet anyway." The next morning brought a gentler cold and skies so blue they hurt to look at. Liza begged to go sledding on the hill behind the house. Annalise was about to refuse. There was mending to do, and she needed to start the week's baking, when Jack appeared in the doorway. "I'll take her," he said. "Need to check the fence line anyway." Annalise looked between him and Liza's pleading face. "You don't have to." "Could use the company." He didn't quite meet her eyes. "If that's all right." She watched them go, Liza chattering excitedly while Jack pulled the sled. His responses too quiet to hear, but evident in the way Liza kept laughing. They were gone for over an hour, returning with red cheeks and snow-covered clothes. "Mama, I went so fast." Liza burst through the door, words tumbling over each other. "And Mr. Jack showed me how to steer, and we saw a rabbit and its tracks in the snow. And did you know they hop in a special pattern?" Behind her, Jack stood knocking snow off his boots, and Annalise could have sworn he was fighting a smile. "Go change into dry clothes," she told Liza. "Then you can tell me all about the rabbit." When the child had scampered off, Annalise turned to Jack. "Thank you." He shrugged. "She's good company, asks a lot of questions, but good ones, about the animals, the weather. Smart girl." "She is." Annalise hesitated. "Her father never thought so. Said too much curiosity wasn't proper for a girl." Her father was wrong. The simple certainty in his voice made her eyes sting. She turned quickly back to the stove. "I'll have coffee ready in a minute." No rush. But he didn't leave. Stood there bringing the scent of cold air and pine into her warm kitchen. "Annalise." She stilled. It was the first time he'd used her given name. "You're doing a good job with her. Want you to know that?" Then he was gone, leaving her standing there with her heart doing strange things in her chest and her hands trembling as she measured coffee grounds. February arrived with a blizzard that trapped them all inside for 3 days. By the second day, Liza was restless, bouncing off the walls with pent-up energy. Jack surprised them all by teaching her to play checkers using dried beans on a board he drew on brown paper. "You have to think ahead," he explained patiently as Liza frowned over her next move. "See what might happen, not just what's happening now. Like when Mama makes bread, she has to think about tomorrow." Exactly like that. Annalise, mending by the stove, hid her smile. Jack was a surprisingly good teacher, gentle and patient in a way that Thomas had never been. When Liza finally won a game legitimately, Jack didn't let her win. She crowed with delight. "I beat Mr. Jack, Mama. Did you see?" "I saw." "Sweet girl." Can we play again? After supper, Jack said. Need to check on the horses now. But when he stood, he swayed slightly, catching himself on the table edge. Annalise was beside him in an instant. Are you all right? Fine, just stood too quick. But she could see the flush on his cheeks, the slight glaze to his eyes. She reached up, laid her hand on his forehead before he could pull away. He was burning with fever. You're sick. I'm not. Sit down. Maybe it was her tone, or maybe the room was spinning more than he'd admit. But he sat. Annalise felt his forehead again, checked the glands in his throat despite his attempts to lean away. How long have you been feeling poorly? I'm fine. Jack. She used his name like a weapon, and he blinked at her. How long? Since yesterday, maybe the day before. It's nothing. It's not nothing. You're burning up. She turned to Liza, who was watching with wide eyes. Sweet girl, can you be very helpful and bring the extra quilts from the cupboard? As Liza ran off, Annalise fixed Jack with a stern look. You're going to bed. No arguments. The horses. We'll survive one day without you. Bed. Now. He stood, swayed again, and she caught his arm. For a moment, they were close, closer than they'd ever been, and she could see the fever-bright blue of his eyes, feel the heat radiating from his body. Stubborn woman, he muttered. Stubborn man, she replied. Come on. She helped him to the parlor, where his bedroll still lay from the cold snap. He collapsed onto it with less protest than she'd expected, which worried her more than anything. The fever worsened through the night. Annalise sat with him, cooling his face with damp cloths, trying to get him to drink water or weak tea. He tossed restlessly, mumbling words she couldn't catch. Once, clearly, he said Sarah, and his hand reached out, grasping at nothing. Shh, Annalise murmured. It's all right. Rest now. Liza crept in several times, bringing fresh water, asking in whispers if Mr. Jack would be okay. Annalise assured her he would, praying she was right. She'd seen too many fevers turn bad, especially in winter when bodies were already worn down by cold and hardship. Near dawn, the fever broke. Jack's breathing eased, and he fell into true sleep rather than the restless tossing of fever dreams. Annalise allowed herself to slump in the chair, exhaustion hitting her all at once. She woke to find Jack watching her, his eyes clear though shadowed with fatigue. You stayed, he said, voice rough. Of course I stayed. Someone had to make sure you didn't do something stupid like try to go to the barn. A weak smile crossed his face. Thought about it. I know you did. She leaned forward, checked his temperature with the back of her hand. Better. Much better. How do you feel? Like I got kicked by a horse, but better than last night. He struggled to sit up. You should lie back down and rest. Sam will be by today. He can handle the horses. He subsided, but she could see it chafed at him to be idle. I don't like being useless. You're not useless. You're sick. There's a difference. She stood, stretching cramped muscles. I'll bring you some broth. You need to eat. Annalise. His voice stopped her at the door. Thank you. She looked back at him, this proud, closed-off man who was learning, slowly, to accept help. You do the same for me. Yes, he said simply. I would. Recovery was slow. Jack was a terrible patient, trying to get up too soon, insisting he was fine when he clearly wasn't. But Liza appointed herself his keeper, sitting with him for hours, chattering about everything she saw from the window, bringing him pictures she'd drawn. This one's you, she announced, showing him a figure that was mostly hat and boots. And this is Mama, and this is me, and we're all having a picnic when the snow melts. That's fine work, Jack said seriously. Will there be cake at this picnic? Oh yes, Mama makes the best cake, with real sugar frosting and everything.
watching them together. Annalise felt that dangerous warmth in her chest again. This was what she'd wanted for Liza. Not just safety, but warmth, connection, the kind of gentle attention that helped a child bloom. On the third day, Jack was well enough to sit at the kitchen table for meals. He still tired easily, but the fever was gone and his appetite returning. That evening, as Annalise cleared the dishes, he spoke. "I've been thinking," she glanced at him, wary. "Oh, about the room off the kitchen. It's too small for both of you. Getting cramped." Her heart sank. Of course, he was well now. Would want them to leave. Find other arrangements. "There's a room upstairs," he continued. "Sarah's sewing room. It's been closed up, but it's sound, good size. 2 windows. If you wanted, you and the girl could have it." Annalise set down the plate she was holding very carefully. "You're offering us a room in the main house." "Makes sense. Warmer upstairs. Heat rises. And the girl's growing. Needs more space." He studied his coffee cup intently. "If you're planning to stay, that is—" "Are you asking us to stay?" He looked up then, met her eyes directly. "I'm saying you can, if you want." It wasn't a declaration. Jack Leland wasn't a man for pretty words or grand gestures. But, in his way, he was offering them more than a room. He was offering them a place, a permanence they hadn't had in so long. "We'd like that," Annalise said softly. "Very much." Liza, who'd been listening with the selective deafness children perfect when adults are having important conversations, suddenly piped up. "Does this mean we're staying forever?" Jack and Annalise looked at each other across the kitchen. A whole conversation in that glance. "For as long as you like," Jack said finally. "Forever then," Liza declared with 6-year-old certainty. "Because I like it here in Mr. Jack needs us to take care of him when he's sick and teach him to smile more." Jack's ears turned red, but Annalise could see the pleased embarrassment in his eyes. "Out of the mouths of babes," she murmured. That night, after Liza was asleep, Annalise found Jack standing on the porch despite the cold, looking out at the starlit snow. "Thank you," she said, joining him. "For the room, for everything." "Should be thanking you. House feels different with you here. Better, like it's supposed to have people in it again." They stood quietly, breath misting in the cold air. The moon was rising, painting everything silver and shadow. "I know what it's like," Jack said suddenly. "Being with someone cold. Sarah wasn't like that. She was warm as summer. But after she died, I turned into someone cold. Didn't mean to, just happened." "You're not cold." He glanced at her. "No." "Careful. Maybe. Guarded. But not cold. Cold men don't make sleds for little girls or teach them checkers or worry about rabbits being warm enough in winter." "When did I worry about rabbits?" "Yesterday. You told Liza they had warm burrows and thick fur and families to snuggle with." She asked. Seemed important to her? "Exactly." Annalise smiled. "A cold man wouldn't care what was important to a 6-year-old girl." They fell silent again. But it was the comfortable silence of people who didn't need words to fill every space. Inside, the house was warm and waiting. Tomorrow there would be the move upstairs, a new room to clean and settle into. But tonight, standing in the cold with this man who was learning to thaw, Annalise felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The blizzard struck without warning on a Tuesday night in late February. Annalise woke to the sound of wind shrieking like a living thing and snow hitting the windows with the force of thrown sand. The house groaned under the assault, timbers creaking in protest. She lit a lamp and checked on Liza, still sleeping soundly in their new upstairs room. The child had adapted to the space with delight, especially the window seat where she could watch the horses in the pasture. Now that window was black with night and white with driving snow. Downstairs, she found Jack already up, feeding wood into the stove. He looked up as she entered, and she could see the concern in his eyes. This is a bad one, he said without preamble. Worse than anything we've had this winter. The animals. Got them settled before dark. Thank God. Had a feeling this was coming. He straightened, wincing slightly. The fever had left him thinner, though he'd never admit to still feeling weak. We're going to lose some shingles off the roof. Sounds like... As if to confirm his words, something crashed overhead. Annalise jumped, but Jack just sighed. There goes one now. Nothing to do about it till the storm passes. They worked together in the pre-dawn darkness, securing what they could. Jack nailed boards over the more vulnerable windows, while Annalise filled every available container with water in case the pump froze. The wind seemed to find every crack and crevice, whistling through the house like it was trying to pry the walls apart. By morning, the world outside had vanished into a wall of white. Snow piled against the doors, and the wind never ceased its howling. Liza came down for breakfast wide-eyed but not frightened, trusting in the adults to keep her safe. "Is this an adventure, Mama?" "Of sorts," Annalise said, setting porridge before her. "We're going to stay nice and warm inside while the storm has its tantrum outside." Like when I used to have tantrums. "Just like that, but louder." Jack snorted into his coffee, almost a laugh. These days, those came more frequently, though still rare as summer snow. The storm raged for 2 days and 3 nights. They fell into a siege routine, keeping the fires going, melting snow for extra water, playing endless games of checkers and reading from Sarah's books. Jack taught Liza to whittle, showing her how to hold the knife safely, how to work with the grain of the wood. "What are you making?" Annalise asked, watching them work by lamplight. "A horse," Liza said with concentration, though her piece looked more like a misshapen potato. "For you, Mama." "It's beautiful." Jack caught her eye, and she saw amusement there. His own piece was taking shape as an actual horse, legs caught mid-gallop. His hands, she noticed, were gentle and sure with the knife, creating something from nothing. The second night of the storm, the temperature dropped so low that frost formed on the inside of the walls. They moved all the bedding down to the kitchen again, creating a camp near the stove. Liza was delighted by the novelty, but Annalise could see the worry in Jack's eyes as the wind seemed to grow impossibly louder. "I've seen worse," he said quietly after Liza had fallen asleep. "That first winter with Sarah, storm lasted 4 days. We burned furniture by the end just to stay warm." "What happened?" "We survived." His voice was flat. "Storm ended. Sun came out. We dug out and went on. That's what you do out here. Endure." "Is that all life is enduring?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Used to think so. After Sarah, figured if I could just endure enough days, eventually I wouldn't have to anymore." The words hung between them, heavy as the snow on the roof. "And now?" she asked softly. He looked at her across the dim kitchen, then at Liza sleeping peacefully between them. "Now I think maybe there's more to it. Maybe enduring is just what you do between the good parts." Before she could respond, a tremendous crack split the air. The house shuddered, and somewhere above them, wood splintered. "The roof," Jack said, already moving. "Stay here." "Jack, no!" But he was gone, grabbing a lantern and heading for the stairs. Annalise waited, heart pounding, listening to his footsteps overhead and the terrible sounds of the storm. When he returned, his face was grim. Beam cracked in the north corner. Not all the way through, but it's bad. If the weight of the snow... He stopped, glancing at Liza. "What do we do?" "Brace it. I've got some timbers in the barn that might work, but..." "You can't go out in this." "No choice. If that beam goes, we lose 1/4 of the roof." They looked at each other, and Annalise saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. But beneath the fear, determination. "I'll help," she said. "No. You can't do it alone. Someone needs to hold the light, hand you tools." She lifted her chin. "I'm not some delicate flower. Jack Leland. I'm a blacksmith's daughter. Something shifted in his expression.
No, he agreed. You're not. They bundled up in every piece of warm clothing they could find. Jack rigged a rope from the house to the barn, knowing that in the whiteout conditions, it would be easy to get lost in the space of a few feet before they left. Annalise kissed Liza's sleeping forehead, praying they'd both come back to her. The storm was worse than she'd imagined. The wind hit like a physical force, driving snow so thick she couldn't see Jack just ahead of her. Only the rope in her mittened hands kept her oriented. The cold was beyond bitter. It was hostile, actively trying to kill them. The barn was a relief only in that it blocked the wind. Jack found the timbers he needed while Annalise held the lantern with hands that shook from more than cold. Getting back was harder, Jack dragging the heavy beams while she tried to light their way. Inside, they didn't speak, just climbed to where the beam had cracked. It was worse than Jack had indicated. The wood was split nearly through, sawdust sifting down like sinister snow. Working together, they managed to brace it. Jack's strength and her steady hands getting the support beams in place. "That'll hold," Jack said finally, voice hoarse. "Has to." Back in the kitchen, they collapsed by the stove. Annalise's hands were numb, her face raw. Jack looked gray with exhaustion, the recent fever having taken more from him than he'd admit. "Thank you," he said simply. "We're in this together," she replied. He looked at her for a long moment, and she wondered what he saw. The too tall woman who'd never been quite right for anywhere, or something else. "Yes," he said finally. "We are." The storm broke the next afternoon. One moment the wind was howling, the next it simply stopped. The silence was so profound that Liza woke from her nap. "Is it over?" "I think so," Annalise said. They ventured to the door, Jack having to dig through chest-high drifts to open it. Outside was a world transformed. Snow had sculpted everything into fantastic shapes. The barn was half buried, the fences completely gone under white waves. But the sun was breaking through the clouds, turning everything to glittering crystal. "It's beautiful," Liza breathed. "Beautiful and deadly," Jack said. "We'll be digging out for days, and we're cut off. Roads won't be passable for a week, maybe more." But there was no panic in his voice. They had food, fuel, shelter. The roof had held. They had survived. That evening, as they ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Liza asked, "Were you scared during the storm?" Annalise started to give a comforting lie, but Jack spoke first. "Yes," he said simply. "I was scared." Liza considered this. "But you went out anyway." "Sometimes you do what needs doing despite being scared. That's what courage is, not being afraid, but acting even when you are." "Oh," Liza thought about this. "Like when Mama left after Papa died, even though she didn't know what would happen." Annalise's breath caught. She'd never spoken to Liza about fear, about how terrified she'd been to leave the only life the child had known. "Yes," Jack said, his eyes on Annalise. "Just like that. Your mother is one of the bravest people I know." That night, after Liza was asleep in the kitchen, they'd decided to stay by the stove one more night. Jack spoke into the darkness. "I was scared of something else too." "What?" "Of something happening to you out there. Both of you." His voice was rough. "This place has been empty so long, just me and the ghosts. I'd forgotten what it was like to have something to lose again." Annalise felt tears prick her eyes. "Jack!" "No, let me say this. That night, when you wouldn't sleep," he stopped, started again. "I'm not good with words, never have been, but these months, having you here, watching that little girl laugh, teaching her things, it's like the house is alive again, like I'm alive again." The fire crackled in the stove. Outside, snow slid off the roof with a soft thump. Annalise gathered her courage, the kind that acts despite fear. "That first night you were sick," she said, "when the fever was so high, I was terrified. Not just for Liza, not just for the ranch,
but for you. Because somewhere in all this, between the silences and the small kindnesses, I started to... She stopped. The words too big, too dangerous. I know. His voice was very quiet. Me too. They lay there in the dark, separated by propriety and the sleeping child between them, connected by something that didn't need words. Outside, the world was frozen and still. But inside, in the warm kitchen of a house that had learned to live again, something new was beginning to grow. When the road's clear, Jack said eventually, we'll need supplies from town. Yes. People will talk about you being here, about us. People always talk. Doesn't bother you. Annalise thought about it. Once, it would have, but I've learned there are worse things than gossip. Cold silences, empty houses, hearts that forget how to hope. Annalise, just her name, but weighted with so much. I'm not going anywhere, Jack, unless you want us to. No. The word came quick and fierce. No, I don't want that. Then we'll face the gossip when it comes. Together. Together, he agreed, and the word sounded like a promise. The next morning brought clear skies and the monumental task of digging out, but also Liza's laughter as she jumped into snowdrifts, Jack's almost smile as he taught her to help clear paths, and the warm kitchen waiting for them when the work was done. It wasn't a declaration of love or a proposal of marriage. It was something both less and more, an acknowledgement that they were no longer three people sharing a space, but something approaching a family. Imperfect, uncertain, but learning day by day how to thaw the frozen places and let the warmth back in. That night, as she tucked Liza into bed in their upstairs room, the roof had held. The patch was good. Her daughter asked, "Are we home now, Mama?" Annalise thought of Jack downstairs, banking the fires, making his quiet rounds to ensure all was secure. Thought of the kitchen that smelled of bread and coffee, the books they read in the evenings, the small daily rhythms they'd built. "Yes, sweet girl," she said. "I think we are." The whispers started the moment the roads cleared enough for Sam Carlson to make his delivery run. Annalise saw it in the way his eyes darted between her and Jack, in the careful way he chose his words. By the time Emma came for the weekly washing, the girl was practically vibrating with unasked questions. "People are talking," Emma finally blurted while they hung laundry in the weak March sun. "About you and Mr. Leland, living here without proper arrangements." Annalise kept her face neutral, pinning a sheet to the line. "People always talk. Mrs. Morrison at the boarding house says it ain't decent, a widow woman and a bachelor, and the little girl to think of." Mrs. Morrison's entitled to her opinion." Emma bit her lip. "I don't think there's anything improper going on, Mr. Leland's too honorable for that, but others can mind their own business." But Annalise knew it wouldn't be that simple. Dustwater was a small town with a long memory, and she was already the woman who'd left for 7 years, who'd returned too soon after her husband's death. Adding fuel to that fire was dangerous. The first real confrontation came when she went to town for supplies. Jack had offered to go instead, but they needed fabric for new clothes for Liza, and he admitted he wouldn't know calico from canvas. So Annalise bundled Liza up and took the wagon to town, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach. At Barnett's General Store, conversation stopped when she entered. Mrs. Hutchins from the millinery was there, along with 2 other women Annalise vaguely recognized. They watched her select her goods with expressions that reminded her of crows waiting for something to die. "Annalise Hartley." "Mrs." Hutchins said finally, voice sweet as spoiled syrup. "We heard you were back in town." "I am. And staying out at the Leland place. I understand." "I'm Mr. Leland's housekeeper." "Yes, a housekeeper." Mrs. Hutchins exchanged glances with her companions. "How modern." Annalise kept her attention on the bolts of fabric, but she could feel Liza pressing closer to her side, sensing the undercurrents. Of course, in my day, Mrs. Hutchins continued, a respectable widow would observe a proper mourning period, a full year, at least, before taking any positions. In your day, Annalise said evenly, women also died of starvation rather than work to feed their children. Times change. Some standards shouldn't. Annalise finally turned to face her. Mrs. Hutchins was a narrow woman made narrower by disapproval. Her mouth pursed like she'd been sucking lemons. My daughter needs food and shelter. Mr. Leland needs someone to cook and keep house. It's a simple arrangement. Nothing about it seems simple to me. A man and woman under the same roof. No chaperone. That poor child exposed to who knows what. Mama, Liza's voice was small. Why is the lady angry? The store went silent. Annalise looked down at her daughter, at those dark eyes that had seen too much already, and felt something fierce rise in her chest. She's not angry, sweet girl. She's just confused about things that aren't her concern. She gathered her purchases. Mr. Barnett, please put this on Mr. Leland's account. Now see here, Mrs. Hutchins started. No. Annalise's voice cut through the store like a blade. You see here, I've done nothing improper. I work for my wages, care for my daughter, and keep a respectable house. If you have concerns about Mr. Leland's moral character, I suggest you take them up with him directly. She left the store with her head high, but her hands were shaking as she loaded the wagon. Liza was quiet on the ride home, and Annalise's heart ached for the questions she could see building behind those young eyes. Jack was in the barn when they returned, working with a yearling colt. He looked up as they entered, and his expression darkened at whatever he saw on her face. What happened? Nothing of consequence. Annalise, she sighed, glancing at Liza. Could you go gather the eggs? Sweet girl, mind the red hen. She's been pecky lately. When Liza had gone, Annalise told him about the encounter. Jack's jaw tightened with each word, his hands stilling on the horse's neck. I'll go to town tomorrow, he said when she finished. Have a word with... No. She touched his arm, felt the tension there. That will only make it worse. They want a reaction, proof that something scandalous is happening. So we do nothing. We do what we've been doing, live our lives, raise Liza, tend the ranch. She managed a small smile. Eventually they'll find someone else to gossip about. But Jack's expression remained troubled. That evening, he was quieter than usual, barely touching his supper. After Liza was in bed, Annalise found him on the porch despite the cold, staring out at the dark hills. This is my fault, he said without preamble. How could it possibly be your fault? I should have known people would talk. A woman's reputation. My reputation was ruined the day I married Thomas Hartley against everyone's advice, then ruined again when I left him before his body was cold. This is nothing new. It's not right. No, she agreed. It's not. They stood in silence, their breath misting in the cold air. Inside the house, a log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks they could see through the window. There's a simple solution, Jack said quietly. Annalise's heart stuttered. What? You could find other employment. In town, maybe, or... Is that what you want? The words came out sharper than she intended. For us to leave? No. The word was fierce, immediate. No, that's not... I couldn't... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. But I won't be the cause of more hardship for you. You're not... You've given us a home, work, kindness. That's not hardship. The talk will happen regardless, at least here. Liza has space to run, animals to love, a man who teaches her checkers and doesn't tell her to be quiet when she laughs. Annalise took a breath. Unless you want us to go, if we're a burden. You're not a burden.
He turned to face her fully, and in the dim light from the window, she could see something raw in his expression. You and Liza are... He stopped, words failing him as they so often did. But Annalise had learned to read his silences, and this one spoke volumes. "Then we stay," she said simply, "and let them talk." The next test came from an unexpected source. Reverend Carmichael arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, his black coat and serious expression making him look like a crow against the melting snow. Annalise saw him through the kitchen window and had just enough time to smooth her hair before he knocked. "Reverend." She kept her voice polite but didn't invite him in. "Mrs. Hartley, I wonder if I might have a word." "If this is about..." "It's about your daughter." His expression softened slightly. "She's of an age where she should be in Sunday school, learning her scripture. I haven't seen you at services since your return." It was cleverly done. Appeal to her maternal duty rather than attack directly. Annalise recognized the tactic but couldn't entirely dismiss it. "Liza knows her prayers. I teach her." "I'm sure you do, but children benefit from community, from learning alongside others. And frankly, Mrs. Hartley, your absence from church only fuels the unfortunate speculation about your situation here." Before she could respond, Jack appeared from the barn, his timing too perfect to be coincidental. He'd been watching. "Reverend." Jack's voice was neutral, but Annalise saw the tension in his shoulders. "Something I can help you with." "Mr. Leland, I was just discussing with Mrs. Hartley the importance of young Liza attending Sunday school." "Were you?" The Reverend shifted slightly. Jack had a way of looking at people that made them want to confess things, and even men of the cloth weren't immune. "The child needs proper spiritual guidance. She gets it. With all due respect, Mr. Leland, a house without the sanctity of marriage is hardly the place." "Reverend." Jack's voice was still calm, but there was steel beneath it. "I respect your position, but Mrs. Hartley is my employee, nothing more or less. She keeps house. I pay wages. If that arrangement troubles your conscience, I suggest you examine why your mind goes to unseemly places so readily." The Reverend's face flushed. "I'm merely concerned for the child's welfare." "As am I, which is why she lives in a warm house with good food and a mother who loves her, instead of scratching for survival in a boarding house or worse." Jack stepped closer, and the Reverend took an involuntary step back. "Now, if you've got concerns about my household, you're welcome to voice them. But if you're here to spread gossip dressed up as godliness, you can get off my land." "I meant no offense." "Then you'll be on your way." The Reverend left, his departure more hasty than dignified. Jack watched him go, then turned to Annalise with something like apology in his eyes. "I shouldn't have..." "Thank you." He blinked at her vehemence. "You're not angry I overstepped. You defended us, me and Liza both." She felt tears threaten and blinked them back. "No one's ever done that before." Something shifted in his expression, a softening she'd been seeing more often. "Someone should have." That night at dinner, Liza chattered about the new calf in the barn, unaware of the day's tensions, but when Jack helped clear the table, something he'd started doing more often, she looked up at him with those two knowing eyes. "Mr. Jack, are people saying mean things about Mama?" Jack froze, dish in hand. He looked at Annalise, who nodded slightly. "Some people are saying unkind things. Yes," he said carefully. "Why?" "Because..." He set down the dish, crouched to Liza's level. "Sometimes people don't understand things that are different. Your Mama and I, we're friends. She works here, helps take care of the house and ranch. But some people think that's strange." "Is it strange?" "Maybe a little, but the best things often are." Liza considered this. Like how Buttercup has one brown eye and one blue eye, that's strange but beautiful. A smile ghosted across Jack's face. Exactly like that. So we shouldn't be sad about what mean people say. No, little one, we shouldn't. Liza nodded decisively, then surprised them both by throwing her arms around Jack's neck. I'm glad we're here, even if it's strange. Jack's arms came up slowly, carefully, to return the embrace. Over Liza's head, his eyes met Annalise's, and she saw wonder there, and something that might have been pain. Later, after Liza was asleep, they sat by the fire as had become their custom. Jack was whittling again, this time working on what looked like a doll for Liza. Annalise was mending one of his shirts, the comfortable silence between them worth more than words. They're not going to stop, Jack said eventually. The talk. I know. It'll get worse. Probably. He set down his knife. I won't have you hurt by this, either of you. We're tougher than we look. I know you are, but Liza needs to see that doing right matters more than what people say. That kindness counts more than convention. Annalise tied off her thread. She's learning that from you. From me? His laugh was bitter. I'm hardly an example of anything. You're an example of a good man, one who treats us with respect, who's patient with a chattering child, who stands up to reverends and gossips alike. She met his eyes. That matters. Jack, more than you know. He looked away, but not before she saw the emotion he tried to hide. They sat in silence again, but it was charged now with things unsaid, with possibilities hanging between them like morning mist. Thank you, he said finally, for staying, despite everything. Thank you for giving us a reason to... Outside, March wind rattled the windows, winter's last gasps before spring. But inside, the fire was warm, the company warming, and for now, that was enough. The town could talk. Let them. Here at Windy Ridge, they were building something stronger than gossip, something that might, given time and courage, grow into everything they'd never dared hope for. The letter arrived on an unseasonably warm day in early April. Sam Carlson brought it with the usual supplies, but his face was troubled as he handed over the envelope. Annalise recognized the handwriting immediately. Precise, angular, cold as January ice. Trouble? Jack asked, noting her expression. My sister-in-law, Thomas's sister, Margaret. She opened it there in the kitchen. Jack, a silent presence behind her as she read. The words were exactly what she'd feared. Annalise, _. It has come to my attention that you are living in circumstances that would have horrified my dear brother. Not content with abandoning him in his final days, you now openly flout all propriety by residing with a man to whom you are not wed. _. There is the matter of Thomas's estate. The house in Missouri has been sold, and there are items of sentimental value to our family. More pressingly, there is the question of Elizabeth's moral upbringing. As her aunt and only respectable relative, I am prepared to take custody should you persist in this scandalous arrangement. _. I expect your response within the month. _ Margaret Hartley Whitfield. Annalise's hands shook as she set down the letter. Behind her, Jack had gone very still. She can't take Liza, Annalise whispered. Can she? What does she have legally? I don't know. Thomas never spoke much of legal matters. Everything was in his name. Of course. She pressed her palms flat on the table, trying to steady herself. But surely a mother's rights depend on the mother being deemed fit. Jack's voice was grim. Living here unwed. I won't give her up. I won't. The words came fierce and desperate. Margaret never even met Liza. Thomas wouldn't visit his family, said they were vultures. And now she wants to swoop in and... She broke off as small footsteps sounded on the stairs. Liza appeared in the doorway, clutching her rag doll. Mama, is something wrong? Annalise forced her face smooth. No, sweet girl. Just a letter from your papa's family. I have more family. Liza's face lit up. Are they coming to visit?
I don't know yet. I hope they like horses. Mister? Jack could show them Buttercup and the new calf. She skipped to Jack's side, tugging on his sleeve. Couldn't you? Jack's hand came to rest on her head, gentle as snowfall. If they visit, I'll show them whatever you like. After Liza had been redirected outside to play, Annalise slumped at the table. What am I going to do? First, you're going to breathe. Jack sat across from her. Second, we're going to think this through. She's in Missouri. St. Louis, her husband's a banker, wealthy. They have connections, influence. But she's there, and you're here. That matters. Local law tends to favor local folk. Not unwed mothers living in scandal. You're not, he stopped, jaw-working. There has to be a way. That evening, after supper, Jack surprised her. I've been thinking about your situation. Oh. We need legal help. Someone who knows the law better than either of us. He paused. There's a lawyer in Denver, Samuel Morrison. No relation to Martha. He helped me with land disputes a few years back. Fair man, discreet. Denver's 2 days' ride. I could go, talk to him, see what options you have. Jack, I can't ask you to... You're not asking. His eyes met hers. I'm offering. But before any plans could be made, another letter arrived. This one was shorter, harder. I have consulted with counsel. Your current living arrangement constitutes moral turpitude, unless you remove yourself from that den of iniquity within 30 days. I shall petition the courts for custody of Elizabeth. Do not doubt my resolve or my resources. H-double. Underscore. Annalise read it aloud in a flat voice. Jack's expression darkened with each word. 30 days, she said numbly. That's not enough time to... It's enough. For what to find other employment, another place to live. Even if I could, she'd find another reason. I left Thomas before burial. I'm working instead of mourning properly. You could marry me. The words fell into the kitchen like stones into still water. Annalise stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What? Jack's face was set, determined. If we were married, she'd have no grounds. You'd be a respectable wife, not a housekeeper. Liza would have a father again. Legally speaking, it would solve everything. Jack! I know it's not. I know you don't. He stopped, started again. It would be a business arrangement. For Liza's sake. You could have your room. I'd keep mine. Nothing would have to change except on paper. Annalise felt her chest tighten. A business arrangement. Of course. What else would he offer? You'd do that, tie yourself to a woman you don't, to a ready-made family. I'd do it for Liza. But his eyes said more. She deserves better than being dragged off by strangers who don't know her favorite color or that she's afraid of owls but loves hawks. It's blue, Annalise said softly. Her favorite color, like your eyes. Silence stretched between them. Outside. Liza's laughter drifted from where she played with the barn cats. It's too much to ask, Annalise said finally. You're not asking, I'm offering. Why? The simple question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked away, out the window to where Liza was attempting to teach a patient barn cat to shake hands. Because she calls me Mr. Jack and tells me about her drawings. Because you leave coffee on the stove when you know I'll be late. Because this house... He stopped, hands clenching. Because I can't watch someone else, I can't watch you lose her. The words hung between them, weighted with everything he couldn't say. Annalise felt tears threaten. A business arrangement, she repeated. If that's what you want. What do you want? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw everything. The loneliness, the fear, the tentative hope he'd been nurturing like a fragile spring plant. I want... He swallowed hard. I want what I see when you're reading to her by the fire.
When she's chattering about her day and you're smiling that soft way you do. When we're all at the table and it feels like... He cut himself off. But that's not fair to you. You deserve better than a broken-down rancher who can't even sleep in his own house. Jack!
Think about it, he said, standing abruptly. For Liza's sake, if nothing else.
He left before she could respond, and she heard his footsteps heading to the barn. Always the barn. Always distance when things got too close. That night, Annalise barely slept. She stood at her window, looking out at the barn where a faint light showed Jack was wakeful too. Marriage. To a man who'd built walls so high she sometimes wondered if even he knew how to scale them anymore. But also to the man who made toys for Liza, who defended them against gossips, who looked at them like they were precious. In the morning, she found him feeding the horses, movement stiff like he hadn't slept either. Yes, she said without preamble. He straightened slowly. Yes,
I'll marry you, for Liza.
Something flickered across his face. Relief, disappointment. Before he nodded. All right, I'll ride to town today. Talk to Reverend Carmichael. Won't he have objections after his visit? Probably, but he'll do it. Better a hasty wedding than continued scandal. In his mind. They stood awkwardly. Two people who'd just agreed to bind their lives together without touching, without even trying to bridge the space between them. Jack! Thank you. I know this isn't what you planned for your life. He looked at her, and for a moment, his guard dropped entirely. Neither was losing Sarah. Neither was 8 years alone. Sometimes life doesn't go according to plan. He turned back to the horses. Sometimes that's not a bad thing. The news of their engagement spread through Dustwater like wildfire. Some were scandalized at the haste. Others smugly satisfied that their predictions of impropriety had been proven right. Martha Morrison was the first to visit, bustling in with a cake and knowing eyes. About time, she declared, settling at the kitchen table. That man's been alone too long, and you need protecting from vultures like Margaret Whitfield. You know her? Know of her. Wrote to me last month, asking about your situation. I may have been less than helpful. Martha's smile was sharp. Told her you were a good Christian woman doing honest work. Didn't mention how Jack looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. Martha. Don't Martha me. I've got eyes. That man's been half in love with you since January, fighting it every step. She leaned forward. Question is, how do you feel? Annalise looked toward the window, where Jack was teaching Liza to bridle a gentle mare. I feel safe, for the first time in years. Safety's good, but it's not everything. It's enough. Martha made a dismissive sound. You're both fools, but at least you'll be married fools. When's the wedding? Saturday. Just family, which means just us and witnesses. Nonsense. You'll have a proper wedding lunch at least. I'll arrange it. And somehow, despite Annalise's protests, Saturday found them standing in the small church with more than just witnesses. Sam and Emma Carlson were there. Martha, of course. Even Mr. Barnett from the general store. Liza stood beside Annalise in her best dress, clutching a small bouquet of early wildflowers Jack had helped her pick. Jack wore his Sunday suit, looking uncomfortable but determined. When he took Annalise's hand for the vows, his palm was calloused but steady. Do you, Jackson Robert Leland, take this woman? The words washed over Annalise like a dream. She'd done this before, but it had felt nothing like this. With Thomas, she'd been young and frightened, pressured by circumstance. Now she stood as a woman who'd survived loss, who knew her own strength, binding herself to a man who saw that strength and valued it. I do, Jack said, voice firm. Do you, Annalise Catherine Durham Hartley, take this man? She looked at Jack, at those winter blue eyes that had warmed so much in recent months, at the man who'd opened his home and was now opening his life to them. I do. Then by the power vested in me. And it was done. Jack squeezed her hand once before releasing it.
and she saw uncertainty in his eyes. The kiss was brief, barely a brush of lips, but she felt it to her bones. Outside the church, in the spring sunlight, Liza danced between them. "Does this mean Mr. Jack is my papa now?" Jack froze, looking stricken. Annalise knelt beside her daughter. "Would you like that?" "Yes, but—" Liza looked uncertain. "Is it allowed, even though he didn't know me when I was a baby?" "Love doesn't always start at the beginning," Annalise said gently. "Sometimes it grows slowly, like your garden seeds." "Oh." Liza considered this, then looked at Jack. "Could I call you Papa Jack, so I remember both papas?" Jack's voice was rough. "You can call me whatever feels right." Liza threw her arms around his neck and over her head. Jack's eyes met Annalise's. She saw fear there still, but also wonder, like a man who'd been handed something precious he'd never thought to hold again. The wedding lunch at Martha's was small, but warm. People who'd gossiped were notably absent, but those who came seemed genuinely pleased. As they prepared to leave, Martha pulled Annalise aside. "That sister-in-law trouble, how did you—" Jack asked my advice. Man was ready to call in every favor he had to keep that woman from taking Liza. Martha squeezed her hand. "You've got a good one there. Might take some time for him to show it proper, but he's good." The ride home was quiet, Liza drowsing between them on the wagon seat, worn out from excitement. As they pulled up to the house, their house now, Annalise realized with a start. Jack cleared his throat. "I'll move some things to the house. Make it proper." "You don't have to." "We're married. I should sleep under the same roof as my—" He stumbled over the word. "My family." That night, as Annalise tucked an exhausted Liza into bed, her daughter asked sleepily, "Is everything different now?" "Some things, but the important things, how much I love you, how safe we are here, those stay the same. And Papa Jack, what about him? He looked scared today, at the church. Trust a child to see what adults tried to hide. I think he was— Big changes can be scary, even good ones." "Should I hug him more? Hugs help with scared." Annalise smiled, smoothing back her daughter's hair. "I think he'd like that." Downstairs, she found Jack building up the fire in the main room. His things, precious few, were stacked neatly by the stairs. "Second room on the left is empty," she said. "Good size, faces morning sun." "Thank you." He straightened, dusting off his hands. "Annalise, I know this isn't what you wanted. A real marriage, I mean, but I promise I'll do right by you both. Be a good provider, good father to Liza." "Jack!" She stepped closer, close enough to see the fear Liza had noticed. "You're already those things. Have been for months." "But now it's legal, official. That's different." "Is it you've been protecting us, caring for us, making us feel safe and wanted? A piece of paper doesn't change that." He looked at her, and she saw the moment his walls cracked just a little wider. "I don't know how to do this. Be a husband again. Be a father. I don't know how to be a wife again, not a real one, but maybe—" She took a breath, took a chance. "Maybe we can learn together." For a long moment, they stood there in the flickering firelight, two damaged people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their lives. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, Jack said, "I'd like that." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't passion or promises of forever. But it was a beginning, tentative and fragile as spring ice. And for now, for them, it was enough. That night, Annalise heard Jack's footsteps in the room below hers, heard him settling into a house he'd avoided for 8 years. And when morning came, he was at the breakfast table, looking uncertain but present. As Liza chattered about her plans for a vegetable garden and what to name the new calf. "Papa Jack, do you like carrots? I want to plant carrots." He glanced at Annalise, a tiny smile quirking his lips. "I do like carrots." "Good.
then we'll plant lots." And just like that, they began the delicate work of building a family from the pieces of their broken pasts. One breakfast, one smile, one small act of trust at a time. The morning it happened was ordinary in every way. May sunshine streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating dust motes and the flour Annalise had spilled while making biscuits. Jack had gone to town for supplies, leaving her to manage the usual morning chores while Liza helped feed the chickens. She was kneading dough for the noon meal when she heard Liza's voice from the garden, high and excited. "Mama, someone's coming!" Annalise wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door. A buggy was indeed approaching, too fine for any of their usual visitors. As it drew closer, her heart sank. She recognized the rigid posture, the severely styled gray hair, the disapproving mouth even from a distance. Margaret Hartley Whitfield had come to call. "Liza," Annalise said, keeping her voice calm, "go to the barn and stay there until I call you." "But Mama—" "Now, sweet girl, please." Something in her tone must have conveyed urgency, because Liza obeyed without further protest. Annalise watched her daughter disappear into the barn's shadows, then smoothed her hair and stepped onto the porch to meet her fate. Margaret descended from the buggy with the air of a queen visiting peasants. She was dressed in black bombazine despite the warm weather, her morning attire a deliberate rebuke. Behind her, a nervous-looking man in a city suit clutched a leather case. "Annalise," Margaret's voice could have frosted windows, "I see you received my letters." "I did. Yet you chose to respond with this farce of a marriage." Her eyes swept over the ranch with distaste. "Honestly, did you think I wouldn't investigate married barely 2 weeks ago to your employer? How convenient. It's legal and proper. I'm a married woman now, with a husband to provide for my daughter." "Your daughter, she's a Hartley, my brother's child." "She's my child. Thomas may have been her father, but he never—" Annalise cut herself off. Speaking ill of the dead would only give Margaret ammunition. Never what loved her cherished her as she deserved. Margaret's smile was sharp. "Perhaps not. Thomas was always weak. But that's precisely why Elizabeth needs proper guidance, a firm hand, suitable education. She has all of that here." "Here," Margaret laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "In this wilderness, with a mother who works like common labor and a stepfather who's nothing but a—" "Careful!" Jack's voice came from behind Annalise, cold as winter wind. Neither of them had heard him return. "You're on my land, speaking about my wife. Choose your next words wisely." Margaret's companion shifted nervously, but she merely lifted her chin. "Mr. Leland, I presume. How fortuitous. I am Margaret Whitfield, and this is Mr. Cornelius Ashford, my attorney." "Ma'am?" Jack didn't move from behind Annalise, but she felt his presence like a shield. "State your business." "My business is with my niece. I've come to see for myself what sort of environment she's being raised in." "Then see it and go." "I think not." Margaret gestured to the lawyer, who fumbled with his case. "Mr. Ashford has papers, a petition for custody, citing moral turpitude and unfit circumstances." "Your hasty marriage doesn't erase the months of impropriety," the lawyer said, finding his voice. "Living together unwed, exposing a child to—" "To what?" Jack stepped beside Annalise. "Hard work, good food, love and care. What exactly has Liza been exposed to that concerns you? The scandal alone—" "Is of your making." Jack's voice remained level, but Annalise could see the tension in his jaw. "We've done nothing improper. I hired Mrs. Hartley as housekeeper. When it became clear that arrangement troubled narrow minds, we married, legal and binding." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "A marriage of convenience. Any fool can see that." "Can they?" Jack reached for Annalise's hand, lacing their fingers together. His palm was warm, steady. "And what makes you such an expert on our marriage?" "The timing speaks for itself. Married just days after I threatened legal action.
We married, Annalise said quietly, because we chose to. Because Jack is a good man who cares for my daughter and treats us with kindness and respect, which is more than Thomas ever did.
Margaret's face flushed.
How dare you speak of my brother?
Your brother, Annalise continued, finding strength in Jack's hand holding hers, was cold and controlling. He wanted a silent wife and a silent child, and punished us with his disappointment when we couldn't be small enough for him. I stayed 7 years, trying to make it work. When he died, I brought Liza here to start fresh, to find a life where she could laugh without being told she was too loud. Emotional manipulation, Margaret said to the lawyer. Make note of it. But Annalise wasn't finished. You want to take her. You don't even know her. What's her favorite color?
I hardly see how.
It's blue. She loves horses but is scared of owls. She can already read simple words and do her numbers to 20. She helps with chores not because she has to, but because she wants to contribute. She makes up stories about the clouds and names all the barn cats. When did Thomas ever tell you any of that in his letters? Margaret's mouth opened, then closed.
He didn't write about her at all, did he?
Annalise pressed on.
Because to him, she was just another disappointment, too spirited, too curious, too much like her mother.
Regardless of past circumstances. The lawyer interjected. Mrs. Whitfield has concerns about the current situation. We'd like to interview the child. No. Jack's refusal was flat.
You've come here uninvited,
making accusations and threats. You'll not upset her with your questions. We have legal standing. You have nothing. A new voice entered the conversation. Sam Carlson drove up in his wagon, but he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a distinguished older man with silver hair and shrewd eyes.
Judge Morrison,
Margaret said faintly.
Mrs. Whitfield.
The judge climbed down from the wagon with Sam's help. Heard you were in town. Thought I'd pay my respects. I didn't realize you were acquainted with these people. The Lelands, known Jack here for near a decade. Solid man. Helped my nephew out of a bad situation few years back. Asked nothing in return. The judge's eyes were mild, but Annalise sensed steel beneath. Also happened to perform their wedding myself when Reverend Carmichael took ill. Beautiful ceremony. The little girl was radiant. Margaret's lawyer cleared his throat.
Judge Morrison, we have legitimate concerns.
Do you now? The judge accepted the papers the lawyer offered, scanning them with practiced eyes. Moral turpitude. That's a serious charge. Evidence. They lived together unmarried for months. Mrs. Leland worked as housekeeper, residing in separate quarters with her daughter. Not uncommon in ranch situations. Many a widow's taken such work to survive. He continued reading. Unfit environment. The Windy Ridge Ranch is prosperous, well-maintained. The child appears healthy and happy. You haven't conducted a proper investigation. Haven't I? The judge smiled.
Son, I've been watching this situation since Mrs. Leland came to town, made it my business to know what was happening, given the circumstances. What I've seen is a woman working honest labor to support her child, and a man opening his home to those in need. Then, when gossip threatened their peace, they did the honorable thing and married. Where's the scandal in that?
Margaret's face was tight with fury.
This is hardly impartial.
No, it's not. It's community. It's neighbors looking out for each other. The judge handed the papers back. You want to pursue this, you'll need to file in Colorado courts. I'll be happy to testify to what I've observed, as will others. I suspect. This isn't over, Margaret said coldly.
Yes, Jack said quietly.
It is. He released Annalise's hand, only to put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. You're not welcome here. Not now. Not ever. Liza is our daughter mine as much as Annalise is now, and we'll protect her from anyone who'd use her as a pawn in their games. You can't.
I have. And if you come here again, if you send more threats, if you so much as think about trying to take our girl, I'll make it my life's work to ensure you regret it." His voice never rose, but something in his tone made the lawyer step back. "Judge Morrison, would you be kind enough to escort Mrs. Whitfield back to town? I believe she's finished here." The judge nodded. "Be my pleasure. Mrs. Whitfield, your buggy awaits." Margaret looked between them all, Jack immovable as granite. Annalise straight-backed beside him, the judge waiting with patient authority. "This is a mistake. That child deserves better than—" "Than love," Annalise interrupted. "Than a home where she's treasured, than parents who see her as a blessing rather than a burden. You're right. She deserves all of that, and that's exactly what she has." For a moment, Margaret's composure cracked, and Annalise saw something almost vulnerable beneath. "She's all that's left of Thomas." "No," Annalise said gently. "Liza is herself. Bright and beautiful, and nothing like Thomas at all. That's not a failing. That's a gift." Margaret turned without another word, climbing stiffly into her buggy. The lawyer scrambled after her, and within moments they were gone, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Judge Morrison lingered, studying Jack and Annalise with knowing eyes. That woman won't give up easy. "Let her try." Jack said, "We're ready." "Are you—" The judge's gaze sharpened. "Marriage is more than papers and appearances. To truly protect that child, to give her the stable home she needs, you'll need to be united, really united, not just playing house for the neighbors." Heat rose in Annalise's cheeks, but Jack's arm tightened around her. "We know what we're doing." "Do you?" The judge smiled. "Well, time will tell. Good day to you both." After the men left, Annalise stood in the sudden quiet, still pressed against Jack's side. Neither moved. "You can let go now," she said softly. "They're gone." "I know," but his arm stayed where it was. "Are you all right?" "I think so. I didn't expect her to actually come here." "She saw you happy. That's what really bothers her. Not propriety or scandal. The fact that you're free of them and thriving." Annalise looked up at him. "How do you know that?" "Because I've seen that look before. In Thomas, actually. The few times we met in town, he'd watch you laughing with Liza, see you standing tall instead of shrinking, and get this expression like he'd bitten something sour." Jack's jaw tightened. "I should have done something then." "You didn't know us then?" "No, but I knew what a man who resents his wife's spirit looked like. Saw it in my own father often enough." It was the most he'd ever revealed about his past. Annalise wanted to ask more, but Liza's voice interrupted. "Is it safe now?" She peered around the barn door. "The mean lady is gone." "She's gone, sweet girl." Annalise held out her arms, and Liza ran into them. "Everything's fine. Was she really my aunt?" Annalise glanced at Jack, who nodded slightly. "Yes, your papa's sister." "She didn't seem very nice." "She's sad. Sometimes sad people forget how to be kind." Liza considered this, then looked at Jack. "You were sad when we first came, but you learned to be kind again." Jack's throat worked. He crouched to Liza's level. "You taught me how, you and your mama both." "Really?" "Really. Every day. You show me something new to smile about." Liza beamed and threw her arms around his neck, over her head. Jack met Annalise's eyes, and she saw everything there, fear and hope and something deeper that he couldn't yet name. That evening, as they sat at dinner like the family they were becoming, Liza chattered about the day's adventures with the barn cats, but Annalise noticed Jack's distant expression, the way his fork pushed food around his plate without eating. "She'll be back," he said when Liza paused for breath. "Margaret, she won't give up this easily. Then we'll face her again, together." He looked at her across the table. "Together." "What's wrong?" Liza asked, picking up on the undercurrent. "Nothing's wrong," Annalise assured her. We're just making plans.
What kind of plans? Jack set down his fork.
The kind where we make sure we stay a family, all of us, no matter what.
Oh, good plans then. Liza returned to her meal, satisfied. Later, after Liza was in bed, Annalise found Jack on the porch, staring out at the darkening sky.
Thank you, she said, for standing with us today.
I meant what I said. She's my daughter now, too. I'll protect her with everything I have. I know. She hesitated, then sat beside him on the bench. The judge was right, though, about needing to be united. Jack was quiet for a long moment.
We are united, in purpose.
Is that enough? He turned to look at her, and in the fading light, she could see the struggle in his eyes. It has to be. I can't. Annalise, I can't offer more. Not yet, maybe not ever. The last time I let myself. He stopped, jaw clenching.
I'm not asking for more, she said gently. I'm just saying that whatever we are, whatever we become, we're in it together now. For Liza, for ourselves, for whatever comes next.
He nodded slowly. Then, so carefully she might have imagined it, his hand found hers on the bench between them, not lacing fingers like he had for show earlier, just his pinky barely touching hers, a promise in the smallest possible gesture. They sat like that as stars emerged overhead. Two people bound by law and circumstance and a growing tenderness neither quite knew how to name. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Margaret wouldn't give up. The town would whisper. The ranch would demand its daily due. But tonight, they had this, a quiet porch, a sleeping child, a touch light as butterfly wings that said more than words ever could.
Annalise,
Jack's voice was barely above a whisper.
Yes. I'm glad you stayed, both of you.
She turned her hand palm up, let his fingers slide between hers properly.
So are we.
And, in the darkness, she thought she felt him smile. The conversation started on a warm June evening. 3 weeks after Margaret's visit, they'd fallen into a comfortable routine, Jack no longer sleeping in the barn, but still maintaining careful distance. They were partners in the business of running a ranch and raising a child. Nothing more, or so they told themselves. Annalise was mending one of Jack's work shirts when he cleared his throat from across the room. He'd been pretending to read the same page of his almanac for 20 minutes.
Been thinking,
he said. She glanced up.
About
what's proper, what's right. He set down the book, ran a hand through his hair. We're married, but we're not. That is, we don't.
Jack!
She kept her voice gentle, sensing the struggle. What's troubling you? People talk. Sam mentioned something his sister heard in town, about how I still keep to my own room, how we're like strangers under the same roof. Since when do you care what people say?
I don't, but you should.
And Liza? He stood, paced to the window. She asked Emma why her mama and papa don't share a room like other mamas and papas. Annalise's needle stilled.
Oh.
It's confusing her, making her wonder if something's wrong. They sat in silence, the weight of unspoken things heavy between them. Finally, Annalise set aside her mending. What are you suggesting? Jack turned from the window, and she saw resolve warring with fear in his eyes. Maybe we should talk about this arrangement, about whether it's serving its purpose. Protecting Liza from Margaret, it is. That's not the only purpose anymore. His voice dropped.
Is it?
The question hung in the air like smoke. Annalise felt her heart racing, but forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. What do you want, Jack? I want. He stopped, started again. I see you with her, teaching her letters, showing her how to tend the garden. I watch you humming while you cook, see you standing in the morning light with flower in your hair. And I want. Another stop. But wanting and deserving are different things. Why don't you deserve it? Because I failed before. The words came out raw.
Sarah needed things I couldn't give. Softness, pretty words, romance. I'm not built that way. I'm practical, quiet. I show care through work, through providing, not through other ways. Annalise stood, moved closer but not too close. Has it occurred to you that maybe I don't need pretty words, that maybe after 7 years of Thomas's cold lectures disguised as affection, I prefer honest silence? You deserve better than another cold marriage. You're not cold. She took another step. Cold men don't make toys for little girls. Don't leave warm milk outside doors. Don't stand between families and harm. That's just basic decency. No, it's love. You just speak it differently. He looked at her then. Really looked. And she saw the moment his walls cracked wider. Annalise, I'm not Sarah, she said softly. I don't need you to be something you're not. But I do need to know. Is this all we'll ever be, partners in practicality? Jack moved then, closing the distance between them until they stood a breath apart. His hand came up, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek. That night Margaret came, he said slowly, when I put my arm around you. It wasn't just for show. I know. Do you? His thumb traced her cheekbone. Do you know that I lie awake listening to your footsteps overhead, wondering what it would be like to have the right to climb those stairs? Do you know that when you smile at something Liza says, I have to look away because it hurts to want something so much? Annalise's breath caught. Jack! I'm no good at this, he continued, words coming faster now like a dam breaking. I don't know how to court a woman I'm already married to. Don't know how to show you. How to be... Just be yourself, she whispered. That's all I want. For a moment they stood frozen, his hand on her cheek, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Then Liza's voice drifted down from upstairs. Mama, I can't sleep. They stepped apart, the moment broken but not lost. Annalise headed for the stairs, then paused. We'll talk more later. Jack nodded, something new and vulnerable in his expression. We will. But later that night, when Annalise had settled Liza back to sleep and returned downstairs, she found Jack had retreated to his room. The pattern of years was hard to break, even when both parties wanted it broken. The next few days were charged with unspoken possibility. They moved around each other carefully, like dancers learning new steps. Jack's hand would brush hers passing dishes. Annalise would catch him watching her, wouldn't look away. The very air between them seemed to hum. Then came the night of the summer storm. It rolled in from the mountains, all thunder and fury. Liza crawled into bed with Annalise at the first crack of lightning, burrowing under the covers like a frightened rabbit. It's just noise, sweet girl, Annalise soothed. But her own nerves were jangled. These mountain storms were fiercer than any she'd known before. Another crack, closer this time, and the house shook. Rain hammered the roof like fists. Then, through it all, a different sound, splintering wood. Jack's door burst open. The barn roof, wind's tearing it off. The horses! He was gone before finishing, and Annalise heard the front door slam. She tucked Liza tighter into bed. Stay here, don't move. I'll be right back. Mama, no. I have to help Papa Jack. Be brave for me. She ran downstairs, grabbed her shawl, plunged into the storm. The wind nearly knocked her flat, rain soaking her instantly. She could barely see the barn through the darkness, but she heard the horses screaming, heard Jack's voice trying to calm them. Inside the barn was chaos. Half the roof was gone, rain pouring in. Jack was trying to lead the horses out, but they were panicking, rearing and plunging. Take Buttercup, he shouted over the storm. She's calmest. The others will follow. Together they worked, Annalise crooning to the terrified mare while Jack handled the more fractious horses. One by one, they led them to the shelter of the equipment shed, its roof still sound. By the time they finished, they were both soaked,
exhausted, covered in mud. They stood in the shed, breathing hard, watching the horses slowly calm.
"You didn't have to come," Jack said.
"Yes, I did." She pushed wet hair from her face. "We're partners, remember?" He looked at her, soaked, muddy, shivering, and something shifted in his expression. "Annalise Durham Leland, you're magnificent." Before she could respond, he pulled her against him and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, fierce. Years of loneliness and months of careful distance exploding in a moment. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands tangling in his wet hair, holding on like he might disappear. When they broke apart, both breathing raggedly, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "If you apologize for that kiss, Jack Leland, I'll never forgive you." A laugh rumbled through his chest. "Yes, ma'am. We should get back. Liza's alone." In a moment, his arms tightened around her. "Just let me hold you, please. I've wanted to for so long." They stood there in the shed with the storm raging outside, holding each other like shipwrecked survivors finding shore. When they finally returned to the house, they were both shivering with cold, but something warm had kindled between them. Liza was where Annalise had left her, covers pulled to her nose. "Mama, you're all wet." "We had to save the horses, but everyone's safe now. Even Papa Jack." "Even Papa Jack." They dried off, changed clothes, and when the storm showed no signs of abating, all three ended up in the kitchen by the stove. Jack made hot milk with honey. Annalise told stories, and Liza slowly relaxed between them. "This is nice," she said sleepily. "All of us together." Jack met Annalise's eyes over their daughter's head. "Yes," he said softly. "It is." When Liza finally dozed off, Jack carried her upstairs, Annalise following. They tucked her in together, standing on either side of the small bed like the parents they'd become. In the hallway afterward, they paused awkwardly. "The barn roof," Annalise said. "Will the horses be all right in the shed?" "They'll keep till morning. I'll start repairs at first light." "I'll help." "You don't have to—" "Jack," she stepped closer. "We're past this. Aren't we past pretending we don't need each other?" He caught her hand, pressed it to his chest where his heart beat steady and strong. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "How to let you in. Sarah always said I loved my work more than her. And maybe she was right. I didn't know how to balance it. When she died, I thought it was punishment for not loving her enough." "Oh, Jack." "But then you came, and you didn't need me to be different. You worked alongside me, understood the rhythm of this life, and I started to hope maybe I could do better this time. Be better." "You don't need to be better. You just need to be here, with us." "I want to be— God, Annalise, I want to be—" She reached up, touched his face like he'd touched hers days ago. "Then be." This kiss was different. Slower, deeper, a promise rather than a desperate claim. When it ended, Jack took a shaky breath. "Your room or mine?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. They were married, had been for months, but this would change everything. "Jack," she said carefully, "I need you to be sure, not just for tonight, but for all the nights after. I won't be a convenience. A warm body when the loneliness gets too much." "Is that what you think?" He pulled her closer. "Annalise, you're not convenient. You're necessary. Like breathing, I just took too long to realize it." "Then your room," she said softly. "It's bigger." He led her by the hand, and at his doorway, she paused. "I'm not her. Jack, I won't disappear in winter. I won't leave you alone with your ghosts." "I know." He drew her inside, closed the door gently. "You're too stubborn for that. Too tall, too plain, too outspoken," she added with a wobbly smile. "Too perfect," he corrected, and kissed her again.
Outside, the storm began to pass, thunder moving away over the mountains. Inside, two people who'd found each other in loss discovered that sometimes the best things grow in the spaces grief leaves behind. They talked through the night, sharing touches and truths in equal measure, building something new on the foundation of all they'd survived. When morning came, they woke tangled together, sunlight streaming through the window. Jack traced lazy patterns on Annalise's bare shoulder. "The barn roof," he said without much conviction. "We'll wait an hour," she finished, pulling him back down. Later, much later, when they finally emerged to face the storm damage, they found Liza in the kitchen attempting to make breakfast. Eggs were everywhere. "I wanted to help," she said, looking between them with those two knowing eyes. "Are you happy now?" Jack and Annalise exchanged glances, and something passed between them that made Liza giggle. "Yes, sweet girl," Annalise said. "We're happy." "Good. Does this mean you'll share a room now like real mamas and papas?" Jack's ears turned red, but he answered steadily. "Yes, if that's all right with you." Liza considered this seriously. "Will you still teach me checkers?" "Every day if you want." "Then it's all right." She beamed. "Can we have pancakes? I'm better at pancakes than eggs." As they cleaned up the egg disaster together, working as the family they'd finally allowed themselves to become, Annalise felt the last of her walls come down. They'd started as strangers bound by necessity, moved through careful partnership, and arrived at something neither had dared hope for. Love, not the desperate, grasping kind she'd thought she'd wanted at 21. Not the cold duty Thomas had offered, but this, steady and sure as sunrise, built on respect and work and choosing each other every day. "What are you thinking?" Jack asked, catching her smiling at nothing. That Margaret was right about one thing. This was a marriage of convenience. She reached for his hand, laced their fingers together. "It's just become terribly inconvenient to imagine living any other way." Jack laughed, really laughed, and pulled her close while Liza applauded the gesture with pancake batter hands. Outside, the barn roof needed mending. Horses needed tending. The ranch demanded its daily due, but inside the kitchen of a house that had learned to love again, a family sat down to imperfect pancakes and perfect happiness, finally whole. December arrived with a gentleness that year, as if nature itself recognized that the household at Windy Ridge had weathered enough storms. Snow fell in soft, steady curtains, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Inside the house, warmth radiated from more than just the stoves. Annalise stood in the kitchen kneading bread, her wedding ring catching the morning light. It had been 6 months since that night of the summer storm when everything changed. 6 months of learning the rhythms of a true marriage, of watching Jack slowly but surely let down the last of his walls. "Mama, look!" Liza burst through the door, cheeks red with cold, eyes shining. "Papa Jack says we can have a Christmas tree, a real one." Behind her, Jack entered carrying an armload of firewood, snow dusting his shoulders. He met Annalise's eyes with that quiet smile she'd grown to cherish. "Figured it was time," he said simply. "Been too long since this house had a proper Christmas." 8 years, Annalise said softly. 8 years, he agreed. Too long. That afternoon, they bundled up and went to the woods together. Jack had spotted the perfect pine weeks ago. He admitted, had been waiting for the right moment to suggest it. Liza danced around them as they walked, catching snowflakes on her tongue. "Tell me again about Christmas when you were little. Papa Jack," she demanded. Jack's stories had become a treasured part of their family life. He shared them carefully, like gifts, each one revealing another piece of who he'd been before loss hardened him. "Well," he said, hefting the axe, "my mother used to make paper angels, dozens of them. She'd cut them from old letters and newsprint, hang them from every surface." "Did they fly?" "In a way, when the wind came through the cabin, they'd dance." As he positioned himself to cut the tree, Annalise watched the sure movement of his hands, the way his body knew this work. Everything about Jack was competent, steady. It had taken her time to realize that his way of showing love was through such actions: the fixed fence, the mended roof, the carefully chosen Christmas tree. The tree fell with a crash that sent snow flying. Liza squealed with delight, and Jack grinned, a full, unguarded expression that transformed his weathered face. These came more frequently now, these moments when joy caught him by surprise. They dragged the tree home together, set it up in the parlor where it filled the room with the scent of pine. That evening, they decorated it with strings of cranberries, carved wooden ornaments Jack had been secretly making, and paper angels cut from old letters, though none from Margaret, who had maintained a furious silence since her failed visit. "It's beautiful," Liza breathed, curled between them on the sofa. "Yes," Jack agreed, but he was looking at Annalise when he said it. Later, after Liza was asleep, they sat by the dying fire. Annalise tucked against Jack's side. These quiet moments had become her favorite part of each day. "I have something for you," Jack said suddenly, "an early Christmas gift." He pulled out a small wrapped package. Inside was a silver locket, simple but beautiful. "Jack, it's lovely, but—" "Open it." Inside was a tiny photograph, new, taken just last month when the traveling photographer came through town. The three of them together, Liza grinning widely, Jack almost smiling, Annalise looking at them both with naked love on her face. "Oh," she breathed. "I wanted you to have something that showed the truth," he said quietly. "Not the arrangement we started with, but what we've become." "What have we become?" "A family, a real one, the kind I thought I'd never have again." He fastened the locket around her neck with careful hands. "The kind I probably don't deserve, but am too selfish to give up." "Jack Leland!" She turned in his arms to face him. "When will you stop thinking you don't deserve happiness?" "Old habits," he murmured, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Then we'll have to build new ones." The next morning brought a surprise visitor. Not Margaret or her lawyers, but a young woman with tired eyes and travel-stained clothes, holding the hand of a boy perhaps 2 years older than Liza. "I'm looking for Jack Leland," she said when Annalise answered the door. "I'm his wife. Can I help you?" The woman's face crumpled with relief. "Oh, thank God. I'm Ruth Patterson. Sarah was my sister." Annalise's heart stopped. Behind her, she heard Jack's footsteps pause in the hallway. "Ruth," his voice was strangled. "Is that Henry?" The boy peeked out from behind his mother's skirts, and Annalise saw Jack's face go white. The child had Sarah's dark hair, her delicate features. "Hello, Uncle Jack," the boy whispered. The story came out over coffee and hastily made breakfast. Ruth's husband had died in a mining accident. She'd lost everything trying to pay his debts, had nowhere else to turn. "I know it's been years," Ruth said, hands wrapped around her cup like she was trying to absorb its warmth. "I know we didn't part well, but Henry remembers the stories Sarah used to tell about the ranch, about you. I thought maybe—" "You thought right," Jack said firmly. "Your family, both of you. You'll stay as long as you need." Annalise watched emotions chase across his face, pain at the reminder of Sarah, but also something like redemption, a chance to do right by Sarah's memory by caring for her sister. Within days, Ruth and Henry were integrated into their household rhythm. Ruth took over some of the household work, grateful to contribute. Henry, shy at first, soon followed Liza around like a shadow, and she basked in having someone to boss around and protect in equal measure. "Is it all right?" Jack asked one night, watching from the window as the children built snow forts. "Having them here, I should have asked you first." "They're family," Annalise said simply. "That's what you do for family." He pulled her close. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Only twice." "Shameful. I'll have to do better."
Christmas Eve arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. The house was full of warmth and cooking smells, children's laughter and adult conversation. Ruth had proven to be good company, and her gratitude for their welcome was touching. That night, they attended the Christmas Eve service in town. Annalise had been nervous about their reception, but Martha Morrison's fierce championing had done its work. They were greeted with nods and smiles, and Reverend Carmichael himself shook Jack's hand. "Fine family you have there. Leland," he said. "God's blessed you." "Yes," Jack said, his arm around Annalise's waist. "He has." During the service, as candles flickered and voices raised in silent night, Annalise felt tears slip down her cheeks. A year ago, she'd been trapped in a cold house with a cold man, wondering if she'd ever feel warm again. Now she stood surrounded by family, chosen and blood, complicated and perfect. Jack noticed her tears, pulled her closer. "All right," he whispered. "Perfect," she whispered back. After the service, they returned home to find snow beginning to fall again. The children begged to stay up, but eventually Ruth herded them to bed with promises of Christmas morning surprises. Jack and Annalise sat by their tree, watching the candles flicker on the branches. "I keep thinking I'll wake up," Jack said quietly. "Find out this was all a dream, that I'm still alone in that barn, frozen inside and out." "You're not dreaming." Annalise laced their fingers together. "Though I understand the feeling, sometimes I can't believe we're here." "Where's here?" She thought about it. "Happy, safe, loved, together." "Together," he repeated. "That's the best part." A sound from upstairs made them both look up. Soft footsteps on the landing. "Someone's awake," Annalise murmured. "Christmas excitement," Jack said. "Should we check?" They climbed the stairs together, found Liza's door cracked open. Inside, both children were asleep, but Liza had crawled into Henry's bed. The two of them curled together like puppies. Ruth stood in the doorway, tears on her cheeks. "She had a nightmare," Ruth whispered. Henry woke up and invited her over. Said that's what cousins do, keep the bad dreams away. Jack made a rough sound in his throat. Annalise squeezed his hand. "Come," she said softly to Ruth. "Let's have some of that mulled cider Jack made. The children are fine." They sat up talking until late, the three adults who had all known loss finding comfort in shared understanding and new beginnings. When Ruth finally retired, yawning, Jack and Annalise remained. "One more gift," Annalise said, producing a small package. Jack opened it to find a new pocket watch, the case engraved with a simple message, "No longer frozen, love always, A and L." "How did you know?" he asked roughly. "That your old one stopped the day Sarah died. Sam mentioned it once." She touched his face gently. "I thought it was time you had one that worked, to mark the minutes of this life. Not the last one." He kissed her then, deep and thankful. And when he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "I love you. Have I mentioned that?" "3 times today. You're improving." "Good. Because I plan to tell you every day for the rest of our lives. Maybe multiple times, just to make up for the months I was too scared to say it. I'll hold you to that." Christmas morning dawned bright and cold. The children burst into their room at an indecent hour, dragging them downstairs to see what Santa had brought. The parlor was a chaos of paper and ribbons, laughter and excited exclamations. "A real doll," Liza clutched her new treasure, "with a china head." "Soldiers." Henry arranged his carved army, courtesy of Jack's patient whittling. "A whole regiment." Ruth cried over the warm cloak they'd gotten her, protesting it was too much. Jack gruffly accepted the new work gloves Annalise had made, immediately putting them on and declaring them perfect. But the best moment came when Liza climbed into Jack's lap, Henry leaning against his other side, both children demanding a story. Annalise watched her husband, for he was that now,
truly and completely. Gather the children close and begin. Once upon a time, there was a house that forgot how to be happy. Ruth caught Annalise's eye, smiled through her tears. They both knew this story, had lived it in their own ways. But then, Jack continued, some very special people came to visit, and bit by bit, room by room, they helped the house remember. As snow fell outside and the fire crackled within, as Jack's voice wove magic for the children and Ruth hummed carols from the kitchen, Annalise touched the locket at her throat. Inside was proof of what they'd built from the ashes of their former lives. Not perfect, nothing ever was, but real and strong and theirs. She thought of that first night, standing in the snow while Jack told her she could sleep in the kitchen to keep warm. How neither of them could have imagined they'd end up here, a family complete with complications and joys in equal measure. And they lived happily ever after? Liza asked as Jack's story wound down. No, Jack said, surprising them. They lived happily right now. Ever after is too far away to think about. But right now, they were perfectly, completely happy. That's a better ending, Henry decided. Yes, Annalise agreed, meeting Jack's eyes over the children's heads. It is. And in the warm house that had learned to love again, surrounded by the family they'd built from hope and courage and careful trust, they celebrated not just Christmas but the everyday miracle of choosing each other. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in fresh possibilities. Inside, there was coffee and laughter, stories and songs, and the quiet contentment of hearts finally, fully at home. That night, as they lay entwined in their bed, Jack's hand found the place where her waist curved, pulled her back against him. Remember that first night you couldn't sleep? He murmured against her hair. When you offered to help, she smiled in the darkness. Your hand right here, telling me I wasn't alone anymore. Best decision I ever made, he said, even if I didn't know it then. And now? Now I can't sleep without you. He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. Funny how things change. The best things usually are funny that way, she said, echoing Liza's long-ago wisdom. And in the quiet of their room, in the house full of sleeping children and new family, in the life they'd built from the ashes of their losses, Annalise finally understood what home truly meant. Not a place, but a feeling. Not perfection, but acceptance. Not the absence of scars, but the presence of healing. Here, with Jack's arms around her and their daughter safe down the hall, with Ruth and Henry adding their own stories to the tapestry of their days, she was exactly where she belonged. The girl who'd been too tall, too outspoken, too much had found a man who thought she was just right. The widow who'd fled a cold marriage had discovered warmth she'd never dreamed possible. And if sometimes she still couldn't sleep, it was only because she was too happy to waste the hours in dreams when reality had become so sweet. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. I love you too, came the rumbling response. Now sleep. Tomorrow the children want to go sledding. All of us. All of us. We're a family. Remember, we do things together. Together. The word that had become their foundation, their promise, their everyday truth. And as sleep finally claimed her, Annalise smiled. Some love stories began with passion and drama. Theirs had begun with a cup of hot milk left outside a door and a hand reaching across cold sheets to say, "You're not alone." It was, she thought, a very good beginning indeed, and an even better middle. As for the ending, well, as Jack had told the children, ever after was too far away to think about. Right now was exactly where they needed to be. Thank you so much for listening to our story today. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts about Annalise and Jack's journey. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And if you really enjoyed it, please hit the hype button so more people can discover this tale of love blooming in the harsh but beautiful frontier. Your support means the world and helps us bring more of these heartfelt Western romances to life.
Until next time, partners.